Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into something pretty epic today, the Comanche Empire.
Oh yeah, this one's a wild ride.
We're going deep with S.C. Gwynne's Empire of the Summer Moon. And trust me, it's way more than just cowboys and Indians.
You got that right. Gwynne really digs into the Comanche, their rise and fall, and how they shaped the American West.
So, for anyone who hasn't cracked open this book yet, we've got the Comanche people, their whole journey from dominating the plains to ending up on reservations.
And woven into all of that, you've got these incredible personal stories, like Cynthia Parker and her son, Quanah.
Yeah, those stories are nuts. But first, let's get a handle on the Comanche themselves. They were known as Lords of the Plains for a reason, right?
Absolutely. Imagine the southern plains before, tons of European settlers showed up. Vast grasslands, teeming with buffalo. It was a harsh land.
So how did the Comanche become the top dogs in that kind of environment?
They adapted. And a big part of that was the horse.
Yeah, everyone pictures Comanche warriors on horseback. But it was more than just transportation, right?
Way more. It transformed them. Gwynne says they didn't just ride horses, they thought horses. It was like this spiritual connection almost.
Okay, I can see that. But they weren't just one massive group, right?
Nope, they were organized into smaller bands, kind of like these independent mobile communities.
Right.
Allowed them to be super flexible, spread out when resources were scarce.
And then come together for big stuff like hunts or raids.
Exactly. It made them incredibly tough to deal with for anyone trying to control them.
Yeah.
Like, think about it. They went from being a mountain people to controlling huge chunks of territory.
That's a massive power shift. How'd they pull that off?
Well, they were masters of strategy. Take the Battle of Adobe Walls in 1874. The Comanche were outnumbered, facing U.S. soldiers with way better weapons.
But they used the terrain to their advantage.
Oh, yeah. And their horsemanship, plus some seriously clever tactics, they inflicted some serious damage and held off a much larger force.
Okay, so we've got this picture of the Comanche as incredibly skilled, adaptable masters of their world.
For sure. But then that world started to shrink, The American frontier pushing westward. Conflict was bound to happen.
And that's where these personal stories like Cynthia and Parampers really hit you in the gut. Talk about a clash of cultures.
Oh, man. Her story's unbelievable. Captured during the Fort Parker massacre when she was just a kid.
9 years old. It's hard to even fathom what that must have been like.
Total nightmare. But the thing is, she didn't just survive, she thrived. Became fully integrated into Comanche society.
Married a Comanche chief, raised a family.
Right. Her story makes you think about what it even means to belong to a culture. It's not always so black and white.
Yeah, it really blurs those lines. And then you've got her son, Quanah, who becomes this central figure later on, born between two worlds.
And he ends up the last great Comanche war chief. His story is like a microcosm of the whole Comanche experience, Shaped by both cultures, but forced to make impossible choices.
That's where we'll pick things up next time. This clash of cultures is about to get a whole lot more intense. So, last time we left off with this clash brewing between the Comanche and, well, the whole idea of westward expansion.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that the Comanche, they didn't view land the same way European settlers did.
I mean, yeah, the settlers wanted to own it, fence it off.
Right, it was all about property. But the Comanche, they were connected to the land, to nature, in a way that's hard to explain.
Like a cyclical understanding, right? Abundance and scarcity as part of the natural order.
Exactly. And that's where a lot of the conflict stemmed from. The Comanche, who had ruled the plains for generations, suddenly they're facing an enemy who plays by totally different rules.
And to those settlers, the Comanche way of life, it was just an obstacle.
Something to be removed, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, Gwynne points out that for the Comanche, raiding wasn't just about, loot and stuff.
There is a cultural element to it.
Oh, absolutely. It was a way to prove yourself, a test of courage and skill. Gwynne even compares it to that medieval European thing.
Chivalry.
Yeah, chivalry, where knights would go on quests to prove their bravery. Of course, with the Comanche, the violence was definitely real.
No shortage of victims on both sides.
Right. But you can't just look at it through a modern lens. You have to consider the cultural context.
Okay, so we've got this clash of cultures, different views on land, on warfare, everything, and then you throw in the whole buffalo thing.
Ah, yes, the buffalo. The heart of Comanche life. Food, clothing, shelter, you name it, it came from the buffalo.
And its destruction wasn't just an accident, right? This was a deliberate strategy.
Absolutely. The U.S. government knew that to control the Comanche, they had to break this connection. So they encouraged mass hunting.
There were even bounties on buffalo hides.
Yeah, and it was brutal. Millions of buffalo gone in a few decades. An ecological disaster,
Yeah.
but for the Comanche. A cultural and spiritual catastrophe.
You can't even imagine what that must have been like, seeing your whole world collapse. And this is where Quanah's story becomes so powerful.
Oh yeah, he saw it all firsthand. The decline of his people, the loss of their freedom, everything. And he had to figure out, how do you lead in this new reality?
Because he did become a leader, didn't he? Even as things fell apart.
He did. But not everyone agreed with his approach. Some saw him, embracing parts of white culture as a betrayal.
But he saw that things had changed irreversibly.
Right, he couldn't turn back time. So he had to find a way forward, encouraged his people to learn English, send their kids to school.
Even adopted some ranching practices.
Yeah, to try to keep some economic independence.
Yeah.
He was walking a tightrope, for sure. Preserving Comanche culture while adapting to a whole new world.
And there were definitely clashes, right? Disagreements about the best way forward.
Oh, yeah, internal divisions. It was messy. But Quanah's story, in the end, it's about resilience. Finding a way to adapt even when you've lost so much.
And Gwynne seems to really respect him, even with all his flaws.
He does. And that's what's so great about Empire of the Summer Moon. It's not some simple good versus evil story.
It acknowledges the messiness of it all. The human cost, the flawed individuals on all sides.
Right, it's about looking at the nuances.
Yeah.
And there's this one line Gwynne says, the Comanche weren't defeated, they were outlasted.
That's a powerful distinction.
Yeah, it highlights the fact that they didn't fall because they were weak. It was this combination of overwhelming forces, the military disease, the loss of the buffalo.
This relentless push west, no matter the cost.
Makes you think about the stories we tell about American history, That westward expansion was this glorious triumph. Gwynne's book, it challenges that narrative.
Forces you to see it from different perspectives.
Yeah, and to recognize that one group's progress often means another's suffering. The Comanche story, as tragic as it is, it also shows their strength, their ability to hold on to their identity.
Even when everything's pushing them to assimilate.
And it's a reminder that history isn't just something that happened in the past. It shapes who we are now, how we understand our nation, how we deal with the legacies of, colonization and cultural clashes.
Speaking of legacies, I'm curious what you thought about how Gwynne portrays Cynthia and Parker's story, because hers is just captivating and incredibly sad.
Yeah, captured as a kid, raised Comanche, then forced back to white society after, 25 years?
It really highlights the human cost of these cultural clashes, She lived in two worlds, basically, but never fully belonged to either one.
Quanah, her son, he tried to make sense of it all right, even went to visit her on the reservation, but she never really adjusted back to being white.
It's heartbreaking. Gwynne talks about that in the book, and it really makes you think,
Yeah.
like about how powerful cultural immersion can be.
Yeah, you can't just erase someone's entire life, their sense of belonging like that.
Exactly. And it just highlights how forced assimilation, it just doesn't work like that. It makes you think about the ripple effects, How these events from so long ago, the trauma still echoes through generations.
Absolutely, and that's why it's so important to study history, to understand not just the dates and battles, but the real human experiences.
So much complexity.
Right, and each one with its own impact, its own ripple effect.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the Comanche Empire, what are some of the key takeaways you hope our listeners are thinking about?
Well, I think it's important to remember that the Comanche story, it's not just about defeat.
It's about so much more.
Right, it's about resilience, about adaptability, about a culture that was so rich and vibrant.
They were masters of their world, strategic geniuses when it came to warfare, and their horsemanship, legendary.
And I think it's also important to re-examine how we think about westward expansion.
Yeah, to see it not just as this, triumph of progress.
Exactly, because it was also a brutal process, and it had a devastating impact on indigenous people.
It's about seeing those nuances, right? The shades of gray that get left out of a lot of history books.
And Gwynne does a great job of that, of showing the humanity of the Comanche, their strengths and weaknesses.
That makes them real people.
He does, and he leaves us with a lot to think about.
He really does.
Like knowing everything we know now about the Comanche, how do we deal with the legacy of westward expansion? How do we reconcile that with what happened to native populations?
That's a big question.
It is, but it's one we have to wrestle with. And I think it starts with acknowledging those complexities and recognizing the injustices of the past.
I'm really trying to understand those different perspectives.
Absolutely.
And for anyone listening who's now super intrigued by all of this, I can't recommend Empire of the Summer Moon enough.
It's such a captivating read.
Yeah.
You really get pulled into that world.
And it sticks with you. It makes you think.
It reminds you that history isn't just something in the past. It shapes us today, and it's up to us to engage with it in a thoughtful way.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
The Comanche story, it's got tragedy, it's got complexity, but it also teaches us about resilience, about adaptation, about the human spirit.
So well said.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
Until next time, everyone, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.
Watch we ride fast and free. Echo warriors sweeping through the trees. In shadows we gather a fearsome tribe. Under the stars the Comanche thrives. Hear the drums beat the ancient call. Watch the brave stand mighty and tall. With spirits fierce and hearts so bold. Stories of glory in whispers told. With pained faces we claim the night. Our war cries echo breaking the quiet. Wind in our hair like whispers from past. Guide us forward, destiny vast. Hear the drums beat the ancient call. Watch the brave stand mighty and tall. With spirits fierce and hearts so bold. Stories of glory in whispers told. Through fires we march, crossed rivers wide. With brothers and sisters, the spirit